Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fiscal Philosophy YouTube channel. I consider myself to be a value-oriented investor, and one stock that, kind of started the whole thing back in early 2022 was Intel stock. This is one of the first, it may even be the first stock that I started building a position in my value portfolio, and it's now my biggest position, my biggest winner, and one of my highest conviction positions in that portfolio. Now, as of right now, the price has really ripped over the last year, up 73.8%. And at this point, we're basically back to about the price it was when I first started getting into the position in the first place. I sold cash secured puts. For those of you that don't know the story, starting around the $47 point. And as time went on and the stock price kept falling, I continued to do so at lower and lower prices, occasionally getting signed another 100 shares. I took 400 shares total in assignments on those options. And I continued that process of selling cash secured puts actually all the way down to the bottom on this. And now, if you factor in all the options premiums, all the dividends collected, and the price recovery, I am doing extremely well on Intel. So it was hard, honestly, psychologically, right? So when I first got in, it was dipping slightly. Actually, we can expand out to the 5-year to show 2022 here. So it had been over $50 for a lot of the preceding year, 2021, and even before that, right? And 2022 came, and a lot more information became available about their turnaround plan, their plan to build up their foundry business, 5 nodes in 4 years, all that stuff. And it started to kind of dip a little bit, and dip and recover, as stocks tend to do on that news. And I don't remember the exact date, but yeah, at some point it fell through that $47 point, and I ended up taking assignment, and it crashed lower and lower. And honestly, I stayed the course with it. I said, hey, we kind of expected choppy waters on this, right? We expected some of the numbers to come out to be pretty rough. We expected a big crunch on free cash flow, which was actually made worse, I think, than expected in my case, because the PC demand coming to a close. This is one of those businesses that had a bit of a pandemic bump because of people buying a bunch of laptops and stuff to work from home and all that good jazz. So when that came to an end, demand kind of collapsed in some of their chips, and so they were left with a lot of inventory, some of which probably got sold on clearance or discount, which meant cash flow went down, capital expense went up. It looked pretty rough for a bit there, okay? And hey, it got to the point where it was in the mid-20s, like $24, $25, right? Which I was stressing in my videos that this is a great entry point for this stock. Okay. In fact, I wished that I had had that as my starting point, my cost basis, but I kept selling my cash secured puts and waiting and selling them and waiting, and eventually as you can see this past year, here's for context, that where that low point was, I think this point where it got just under 25 is the absolute lowest. And it's kind of zoomed up back upward. Now, this doesn't mean that the value proposition is necessarily played out. Just because I'm up a lot in it right now doesn't mean that everything is hunky-dory and it's guaranteed to be a banger for the rest of the time. But what this does mean is, I think maybe enough positive things are now coming to light that the market at large is starting to say, oh, hey, look, there's room in this chips market for multiple companies to be successful. And just because other tech companies and chip companies are doing well doesn't mean Intel has to, go to zero necessarily. And I think, also when you look at the expansion of their foundry business and, what they've been able to do, from a technical standpoint in a lot of areas, it's clear that, Pat Gelsinger buys into his own narrative, right? Look, Pat Gelsinger is buying the stock, okay? So he's literally putting his money where his mouth is. He says he believes in their plan, and he buys the stock. I think there's something to be said for that. Now, granted, like Intel's got a giant market cap, and buying a few thousand shares isn't, going to move the needle in that sense. But, when you see a CEO taking their money and just straight up buying shares of the company that they run, I think that's more of a good thing than a bad thing. I think it puts a little bit of credibility behind the words. And the funny thing is, if we go back to, if you look at like analyst estimates, okay, I don't know how exactly how up to date a lot of these forecasts are, but I mean, look at this. A $17 12-month forecast. That probably has not been reevaluated since they were dropping from like 35 down to like 25, right? During that period, it was in vogue to sort of downgrade your Intel estimate. Now, I think the analysts that were talking, high 30s to mid 50s, some their assumptions, regarding what Intel would do in the future probably pretty closely mirrored my own. Although just because you agree with a particular analyst doesn't make them more likely to be right. But I do question what it is these $17 guys, what really, like the guy that came up with $17 as a price forecast or valuation for Intel, like what was he thinking? I mean, that's pretty much, if I'm not mistaken, that's like, let's check the balance sheet real quick. Yeah, that's less than their book value. Yeah, I mean, I think that's if you knock off the goodwill and intangibles, that's $17 a share is probably like their liquidation value. So that guy's projecting bankruptcy for Intel, I guess. But also, back when, again, I thought, hey, this is a really strategic point to average down and, potentially really, capture some great upside here. The news around Intel was so bad. People on Discord were telling me it was a clown stock and yada, yada. That's why I don't really listen a whole lot to a lot of the noise out there, because, when perception is at its worst, that's when it's the hardest to have your conviction and stick with it. But then, in hindsight, it's often the best time to really stick to your guns and do what you know needs to be done intellectually. But your emotions are telling you, and the world is telling you, oh no, this is bad. This is a dog. Don't get in. You should sell. You shouldn't increase your position. I know some people that sold basically at the bottom at like $25. And I even said, like, you're not supposed to sell at the bottom. You're supposed to try to make money on your investment, kind of as a joke. But, people were peeved about the dividend cut and everything else. But hey, I think in a lot of cases, all right, so there's a difference between a company that cuts its dividend because it's a prudent business decision and, preserves shareholder value, versus ones that cut the dividend just because the entire business is just faulty and can't sustain that level of dividend. Whereas with Intel, I don't think that's the case. I think that they can get their free cash flow back up once they're done with all their capital expenditures and everything. Once they build out their foundry business, achieve their nodes and all that. And I think they could probably rebuild their dividend from here. I just think it was a necessary temporary sacrifice. I don't think in a rising interest rate environment, it would be smart for them to effectively fund the dividend with debt, which is what they would have had to do at the higher payout. I think Intel's financially strong enough; they probably could have survived it. But why put the business in a worse financial position? And if you're an investor in the business, why would you even want them to consider doing that in the first place? So those are just kind of my thoughts on Intel. The journey of where we've been and how we got to today. Feel free to join me on the Discord. The link is in the description. I love talking about stocks like Intel on a daily basis with the members of the Discord. Make sure that you, by the way, like the video, subscribe, all that stuff. This is kind of more my old school format, just kind of giving you my thoughts on a stock I haven't really discussed in a good minute on the channel here, but it is actually my biggest holding, so I think it's long overdue to talk a little bit about it. And, that's about it. Have a wonderful day. If you made it to the end, I truly appreciate your dedication. Please make sure that you use your Sharingan on that like button, subscribe to the channel for more of my videos, help me build my audience, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another one of my uploads.